Imagine this listener a single human footprint pressed into ancient ash, hardened long before our calendars began waiting quietly beneath layers of time. You didn't arrive here by chance. Something in the universe has slowed you down tonight, guiding you to a question that has echoed through forgotten ages. What if we are not the beginning, but a return? What if human civilization is not the first to rise on this planet, but a reset after something older faded away? Earth is more than 4.5 billion years old, and our entire recorded history occupies only a thin, fragile surface layer. Beneath it lie epochs, erased continents, recycled patterns repeated. Somewhere in that deep silence, a story may have begun and ended long before us. Let's drift a little deeper. A faint blue light spreads across an empty landscape, not quite dawn, not quite night, as if time itself has paused to breathe. Dust hangs motionless above stone that has known pressure, heat, and silence far longer than any living memory. In this quiet, the planet does not feel old in a human way. It feels patient. It feels aware. The surface beneath you has been erased, rewritten, folded, and reshaped so many times that beginnings and endings blur into the same slow motion. Traveller, you're not here by accident. Long nights have a habit of guiding the mind toward questions that resist closure, questions that do not demand belief, only presence. I have spent countless hours alone with instruments humming softly in the dark, screens glowing with graphs that stretch across millions of years, maps layered with dust from being unfolded and refolded too many times. And the longer you sit with these quiet records, the more obvious something becomes. The past is not behind us. It is beneath us, around us, and sometimes pressing upward just enough to be felt, but not clearly seen. What if civilization did not begin once, but many times? What if what we call the first civilization is simply the most recent one to survive, long enough to remember itself? Earth is more than 4.5 billion years old. Against that scale, agriculture, cities, writing, and industry appear as a brief shimmer, a single flicker of organized complexity on a surface that is constantly in motion. Geology teaches this without drama. Mountains rise and are ground down grain by grain. Rivers cut paths that wander and forget themselves. Continents drift apart, collide, and separate again, carrying entire worlds with them before submerging them into the mantle. Erosion is often described as destruction, but that word is misleading. Erosion is time thinking slowly. It is gravity remembering how to pull. It is water rehearsing patience. Every structure, no matter how solid it feels, is already participating in its own dissolution. Stone softens, metal oxidizes, meaning fades long before material does. If a civilization stood here long before humans learned to shape symbols, its cities would not crumble dramatically. They would relax into the planet loosened atom by atom, until the difference between intention and nature dissolved completely. Listener, imagine standing on this same ground during an age when coastlines lay hundreds of kilometers farther out, when ice locked away oceans, or when tropical forests covered regions that are deserts now. Imagine a society adapted to that world, watching a sky whose constellations were subtly unfamiliar tracking cycles of stars that have since drifted. Their science would have matched their environment. Their myths would have carried the weight of their climate. And when their time ended, as all times do, the Earth would not mark the moment. It would simply continue. This is the part that feels unsettling at first, but only because we are taught to equate memory with permanence. The planet does not store history neatly. It recycles it. Rivers act like moving blades, cutting and carrying, redistributing fragments, until origins disappear. Heat and pressure transform entire landscapes. Glaciers flatten what once stood tall and scatter stones in patterns that look deliberate but are not. Over millions of years, even the idea of a ruin becomes meaningless. There is nothing left to point to and say this mattered. And yet science also teaches us something gentler. The Earth does remember, but only by accident. A fossil forms when conditions align just right. A creature dies where sediment accumulates quickly, where oxygen is limited, where time pauses long enough for minerals to replace flesh. Even then the memory is incomplete. A shape without behaviour, a structure without story. Preservation is rare, fragile and temporary. Most of what ever lived, thought, or built is gone without a trace. Archaeology survives on luck. A city buried under ash before weather could erase it. A tool dropped where erosion slowed for just a moment longer than usual. Entire cultures we know existed are represented by a handful of objects, and even those objects survived only because the planet hesitated. If that much can vanish within a few thousand years, then over millions disappearance is not just possible. It is expected. This is where the idea of a reset quietly enters, not as catastrophe alone, but as process. Climate shifts, sea levels rise and fall, impacts arrive without warning, volcanic winters stretch across generations. Life adapts, reorganizes, simplifies, and begins again. From the planet's perspective, this is not failure, it is rhythm. Forests burn and return richer. Ice retreats and ecosystems reconfigure. Even mass extinctions are followed by explosions of creativity. Life does not cling to one form, it experiments. Somewhere in those experiments, intelligence could arise more than once. Not necessarily human, not necessarily technological in the way we define it. Intelligence shaped by different pressures might leave behind very little. A society built from organic materials in humid climates would vanish almost immediately. An aquatic civilization would dissolve into currents and sediment. A culture focused on knowledge rather than objects might leave nothing recognizable at all. Absence in this context is not evidence against existence. It is simply the default outcome. In quiet moments staring at long decay curves and isotope ratios, this realization feels less frightening than it sounds. There is a calm in accepting uncertainty. Science does not demand certainty. It works with probability, with margins of error, with incomplete records. Radiation decays like a whisper that never lies, but it also never tells the full story. Chemical signatures linger long after their sources vanish, but interpretation depends on context, and context erodes easily. Myth drifts in here not as proof, but as echo. Stories of earlier ages, floods that reset the world, civilizations of gods, giants, or forgotten ancestors. These stories do not need to be literal to be meaningful. They may simply reflect a deep intuition that the world moves in cycles rather than straight lines, that what feels permanent is temporary, that what feels new may have happened before in a form we no longer recognize. Silence, after all, is not emptiness. Silence is the universe thinking. It is the pause between iterations. When you sit with this idea long enough, the fear drains away, replaced by perspective. A reset is not a judgment. It is not a punishment. It is the natural consequence of existing on a planet that is alive with motion. During long nights, when the only sound is a clock marking seconds that feel too small to matter, there is peace in this thought. We are not fragile because we might be temporary. We are meaningful because we exist at all, because we are one expression of a much larger pattern unfolding across deep time. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. The first place scientists look for traces of forgotten worlds is not in ruins, but in layers. The Earth keeps no diary, but it does leave behind strata, each one a thin compromise between what once existed and what survived long enough to be buried. These layers accumulate quietly, compressing years into millimeters, centuries into subtle colour shifts, epochs into chemical ratios that only instruments can read. When we study them, we are not reading history directly. We are interpreting what time allowed to remain. Traveller. The difficulty begins with scale. Human civilization measures itself in generations, dynasties, and calendars. Geology measures in millions of years. What feels permanent to us barely registers against tectonic motion. Entire mountain ranges rise and erode before a continent completes a slow turn. Oceans open and close. River systems migrate until their original paths are unrecognizable. Any evidence of an earlier civilization would have to survive this constant rearrangement, and that alone makes survival unlikely. This is why evidence, if it exists, would not announce itself clearly. It would not resemble streets, walls, or monuments. Those forms depend on stability, and stability is rare. Instead, scientists search for indirect signals. Anomalies that do not fit expected patterns. a layer of sediment deposited too quickly, a sudden spike in erosion suggesting large-scale land use, a chemical concentration that appears abruptly and fades just as suddenly. These are not answers. They are questions written in stone. Modern humans already leave such signatures. Industrial activity alters atmospheric composition. Plastics, heavy metals and artificial compounds settle into sediments. Long after buildings collapse and languages disappear, these traces will remain detectable. They will not say who we were or what we believed. They will only indicate that something altered the planet in a way that exceeded natural background variation. If an earlier civilization modified its environment even briefly, it might have left behind similar fingerprints. Listener, this is where interpretation becomes delicate. Nature produces extremes on its own. Volcanic eruptions inject ash and metals into the air. Wildfires alter soil composition. Meteor impacts redistribute elements across continents. Climate shifts can trigger massive erosion without any intelligent cause. The Earth is capable of producing patterns that look intentional but are not. Distinguishing between natural and artificial signatures requires context, and context is often missing. Radiometric dating offers another window, but it too is limited. It tells us when something formed, not why. A layer rich in certain isotopes may indicate volcanic activity, or it may indicate industrial processing. Without associated structures or artifacts, certainty remains out of reach. This is why scientific caution dominates these discussions. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and over deep time, extraordinary evidence rarely survives intact. Yet caution does not mean dismissal. It means patience. It means acknowledging ambiguity rather than forcing conclusions. In quiet offices and field camps, researchers sometimes encounter data that refuses to settle neatly into existing models. It is not enough to rewrite history, but it is enough to linger. Enough to ask whether our assumptions about intelligence and permanence might be too narrow. Consider how fragile known history already is. Many human societies left behind almost nothing. Entire cultures are known only through second-hand references or a few scattered tools. Others used materials that decay rapidly: wood fibre, organic compounds, leaving no trace after a few centuries. Even within the last 10,000 years, the archaeological record is uneven and incomplete. Absence is common, presence is rare. When we push further back, the gaps widen dramatically. Fossilization itself is an exception, not the rule. Most organisms never fossilize. Most environments destroy remains quickly. Tropical regions where decay is rapid preserve almost nothing. If an intelligent species arose in such conditions, its biological and cultural traces could vanish almost completely. The fossil record would tell us little about behavior, cognition, or social structure. Some researchers have asked whether intelligence must always express itself through durable materials. Humans equate progress with construction tools and modification of the environment. But that is a reflection of our biology and needs. Another species might solve problems differently. It might rely on social coordination, biological adaptation, or temporary tools that leave no long-term imprint. Intelligence does not require monuments. Even among humans, the most enduring achievements are not always physical. Language, mathematics, and abstract thought leave no direct fossil record. They survive only through transmission. If transmission ends, they disappear completely. An earlier civilization could have achieved profound understanding of its world without ever encoding that knowledge into stone or metal. When its population declined or its environment shifted, that understanding would vanish without residue. Myth and memory complicate this further. Some patterns appear repeatedly across cultures. Stories of earlier ages, great floods, lost knowledge, cycles of rise and fall. These similarities do not prove shared origin. They may reflect common human responses to environmental change. Sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age, flooding coastal settlements worldwide. That experience alone could generate enduring flood narratives without invoking earlier global civilizations. Still, the repetition invites reflection. It suggests that human imagination is sensitive to cycles, to the feeling that the present is not the first attempt. Whether the intuition arises from observation, memory, or pattern recognition is difficult to say. Science does not reject such questions, it simply reframes them. Instead of asking whether myths are literal records, it asks what experiences gave rise to them. In laboratories late at night, surrounded by quiet instruments and half-finished charts, there is a strange humility that comes with this work. You realize how much of the past is inaccessible, how much confidence is built on fragments, how easily certainty dissolves when timelines stretch beyond intuition. Evidence becomes less about proof and more about probability, about weighing what could have happened against what usually does. This does not weaken science, it strengthens it. Accepting uncertainty allows space for revision without collapse. If tomorrow we discovered an unmistakable artificial signal deep in the geological record, science would adapt. If we never do, science remains intact. The absence of evidence is not proof of absence, but neither is it permission for belief. It is simply a boundary. Gravity in this sense acts like memory. It pulls everything downward, compressing stories into layers until meaning is flattened. Radiation whispers steadily through time, indifferent to interpretation. Erosion smooths edges until intention and accident look the same. The planet is not hiding secrets from us. It is simply doing what it always does. And so, traveller evidence remains subtle, ambiguous, and incomplete. It does not point clearly toward forgotten civilizations, nor does it rule them out absolutely. It sits quietly between possibility and silence. Somewhere in that space, curiosity rests without urgency. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. There are moments in scientific work when the data does not align with expectation, when measurements sit quietly on a page and refuse to behave. These moments are rarely dramatic. They arrive without spectacle, often late at night, when fatigue lowers resistance and the mind becomes more receptive. An anomaly is not a revelation. It is a pause, a place where explanation slows and attention deepens. Traveller anomalies do not announce forgotten civilizations. They do not whisper names or show clear intent. They appear instead as slight mismatches, small deviations that sit just outside comfortable models. A chemical ratio that seems out of place. A sediment layer that suggests sudden change without obvious cause. A pattern that repeats too consistently to be dismissed, yet too subtly to be declared meaningful. Science notices these things not with excitement but with caution. Most anomalies dissolve under scrutiny. Instruments drift. Samples contaminate. Statistical noise masquerades as significance. This is the ordinary rhythm of research. But occasionally something remains even after correction, recalibration, and skepticism. It does not grow clearer, it simply refuses to vanish. These are the anomalies that linger not as answers but as quiet reminders that the record we rely on is incomplete. Earth's surface has been rearranged countless times. Subduction zones consume entire landscapes. Metamorphism erases original structures. Heat and pressure rewrite minerals until their previous forms are unrecoverable. In such a world, it would be unreasonable to expect clear markers of ancient intelligence. If anomalies exist, they would be subtle by necessity. They would resemble natural features closely enough to escape notice unless examined with patience. Listener, imagine a faint chemical signature locked into stone indistinguishable from natural variation, unless compared across vast distances. Imagine a pattern of erosion that suggests coordinated land use but only when viewed at a continental scale. Imagine isotopic ratios that shift abruptly and then stabilize as if something briefly altered the system before disappearing. These are not proofs. They are hints that invite restraint rather than belief. Modern humans will leave behind similar traces. Long after cities collapse and languages fade, sediments will record unusual concentrations of elements rarely found together in nature. Future researchers may debate whether these signals indicate intelligence or rare geological coincidence. Without context, interpretation becomes fragile. Meaning depends not only on data, but on the frameworks used to read it. This is where humility enters. Scientific models are not mirrors of reality. They are tools, simplified representations shaped by available evidence. When anomalies appear, they test those tools. Sometimes the tools improve. Sometimes the anomaly fades into noise. Occasionally the anomaly persists and forces revision. This process is slow, iterative, and deeply human. Myth often fills the silence here, but science does not need myth to acknowledge mystery. It simply recognizes limits. The geological record is biased towards certain environments and materials. It preserves hard parts and erases soft ones. It favors stability and punishes change. Intelligence that does not align with these biases would be invisible to us, not because it never existed, but because it left no compatible trace. Consider how easily behavior vanishes. Fossils preserve bones, not thoughts. Tools tell us little about social systems. Architecture reveals organization but not belief. Even for recent human societies, the emotional and intellectual worlds are mostly lost. Extend that loss across millions of years and almost everything dissolves into abstraction. Anomalies may also arise from our expectations rather than from reality itself. Humans are pattern-seeking by nature. We notice repetition and infer intention. We detect symmetry and assume design. The Earth, however, produces symmetry and repetition without thought. Crystals form precise structures. River networks branch predictably. Geological processes generate patterns that resemble planning, but emerge from simple rules applied repeatedly. Distinguishing between these natural patterns and potential artificial ones requires restraint. It requires accepting that some questions will remain open indefinitely. The desire for resolution is strong, especially when contemplating deep time and lost possibilities, but resolution is not the goal of science. Understanding is, and understanding often includes uncertainty. In long nights spent reviewing datasets, there is a particular calm that comes from letting anomalies remain unresolved. Not every question needs closure. Some serve as boundaries marking the edges of current knowledge. Beyond those edges lies speculation, which can be explored but not confused with evidence. This distinction preserves clarity without extinguishing wonder. Gravity continues its quiet work throughout all of this. It pulls sediments downward, compressing stories into stone. Radiation decays steadily, indifferent to interpretation. Light carries information across space, but not intention. The universe does not prioritize explanation. It simply unfolds. If an earlier civilization existed, its most enduring legacy might not be material at all. It might be the repetition of patterns. The way intelligence, when constrained by physics and environment, tends to arrive at similar solutions. The way societies, human or otherwise, might follow familiar arcs of growth, complexity, and decline. These echoes would not be memories, they would be convergences. Some researchers speak of a sense of familiarity when studying ancient systems, not because they recognize them, but because they resonate. A layout feels intuitive, a solution seems obvious. This does not imply inheritance. It suggests that intelligence responds predictably to certain challenges. The same world produces similar answers across time. Anomalies then may not point backward to specific lost civilizations. They may point sideways toward the structure of possibility itself, toward the idea that the universe allows certain pathways and discourages others, that intelligence when it arises is guided by constraints older than any species. In this view, the question shifts subtly. It becomes less about whether we are a reset of a first civilization, and more about whether civilization itself is a recurring expression. A pattern that emerges, fades, and emerges again under similar conditions. The Earth provides the stage. Physics writes the rules. Life improvises within them. As the night deepens, this perspective softens urgency. There is no need to force conclusions from incomplete evidence. No need to declare origins or endings. The anomaly can remain what it is, a quiet interruption that invites attention without demanding belief. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. There is a point in every long investigation when the search turns inward, when the absence of answers becomes more prominent than the presence of data. Silence is not an empty space in science. It is a condition, a boundary where evidence thins and interpretation grows cautious. In the study of deep time, silence is not failure, it is the natural state of things. Traveller silence dominates the geological record. Most of Earth's history left no witnesses we can hear. Layers are missing, folded, melted, or carried away. Entire eras pass without leaving a clear signature. This is not unusual. It is expected. The planet is active, restless, always reshaping its surface. What survives does so by coincidence, not intention. And what vanishes does so quietly without announcement. When researchers confront silence, they often feel a subtle discomfort. The human mind prefers continuity, narrative, and closure. We want history to behave like an archive neatly stored and retrievable, but nature is not an archivist. It does not preserve for our convenience. It recycles relentlessly. Soil migrates. Oceans rise and fall. Heat and pressure erase distinctions until only uniformity remains. Silence in this sense is erosion completed. Listener, imagine standing in a place where nothing recognizable remains. No ruins, no artifacts, no clear markers of meaning. Just stone shaped by forces that have been working longer than any language has existed. If a civilization once stood there, silence would not deny its existence. Silence would simply indicate that time finished its work. This realization reframes the question of resets. A reset does not require catastrophe in the dramatic sense. It can occur gradually, almost gently. A slow shifting climate that makes agriculture impossible. A rising sea that claims coastal settlements over centuries. A change in atmospheric chemistry that stresses ecosystems until populations thin. Life adapts or disappears. Knowledge fragments, memory fades, the world continues. Silence also appears within human history itself. Entire cultures known to have existed left behind almost nothing. Their names are lost, their beliefs inferred, their daily lives imagined through fragments. We accept this absence without discomfort, because it occurs within familiar timescales. When silence stretches across millions of years, it feels heavier, but it follows the same rules. In laboratories late at night, surrounded by the soft hum of machines, there is a particular stillness that mirrors this silence. Data sets end. Charts flatten. The signal disappears into noise. At first, this feels like an obstacle. Over time, it becomes a companion. Silence teaches patience. It reminds us that not all questions are meant to be resolved within a single lifetime or even a single species. Some researchers describe a quiet shift that happens after years of working with deep time. Curiosity remains, but urgency fades. The need to prove gives way to the willingness to observe. Silence stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like context. It frames what we know and keeps it honest. Myth often emerges where silence dominates. Stories fill gaps not because they are accurate, because they offer coherence. Flood myths, lost ages, cycles of renewal appear again and again. These narratives do not survive because they preserve facts. They survive because they resonate with lived experience. People observe change. They see worlds transform within generations. They encode that awareness into story. Science listens differently. It does not replace silence with narrative. It acknowledges it. It allows absence to remain absence. This restraint is not weakness. It is discipline. Without it, every anomaly becomes a conclusion and every pattern becomes intention. Silence protects us from that drift. Consider how many times humanity has misread the past by overinterpreting limited evidence. Structures assumed to be temples later revealed as homes. Symbols thought to be religious found to be practical. The past corrects us slowly when new data appears. Silence buys time for that correction. If an earlier civilization existed and left no clear trace, silence would be its final state, not as erasure, but as integration. Its materials redistributed, its energy dissipated, its complexity simplified. From the planet's perspective, this is not loss. It is equilibrium. Gravity continues to pull. Radiation continues to decay. Light continues to travel without carrying stories. The universe does not remember in the way humans do. It does not value continuity. It values consistency. Laws hold. Processes repeat. Outcomes vary within constraints. In this quiet, the idea of being a reset loses its urgency. Whether we are first, last, or one of many becomes less important than how we exist now. Silence invites humility. It suggests that significance does not require permanence. That meaning does not depend on endurance. As the night deepens, this perspective settles gently. The absence of answers does not diminish wonder. It refines it. Silence becomes a space where curiosity can rest without pressure. where imagination can explore without claiming truth, where the universe can remain vast and partially unknowable. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. There are stretches of Earth's history that feel almost unreal when viewed from the present vast intervals where time expands beyond intuition and familiar reference points dissolve. These forgotten epochs are not empty, but they are distant in a way that resists imagination. They existed under different skies, different climates, different arrangements of land and sea. When we try to picture them, our minds instinctively borrow from what we know now, and that borrowing quietly distorts the picture. Traveller to speak of a forgotten epoch is not to speak of a single lost age, but of many layered worlds stacked one upon another. The continents you recognise today were once fragments drifting in unfamiliar configurations. Regions that are now submerged lay exposed beneath ancient suns. Mountain ranges rose where plains once stretched only to erode back into softness. Life adapted again and again, reshaping itself to fit conditions that no longer exist. In these deep intervals, time behaves differently. 1,000,000 years is not an era of legend. It is a unit as ordinary to geology as a decade is to human memory. Whole ecosystems appear and vanish within that span. Species rise, diversify, and disappear without leaving descendants. When viewed from this scale, the appearance of intelligence feels less like an unlikely miracle and more like a recurring experiment conducted under shifting parameters. Science shows us that life has repeatedly approached complexity. Nervous systems evolved independently in different lineages. Social behaviour emerged wherever cooperation offered survival advantages. Problem-solving, communication and memory are not unique strategies, they are efficient ones. Given enough time and the right pressures, they tend to arise. This does not guarantee civilization as humans define it, but it does suggest that intelligence is not a singular event. Listener, imagine an epoch where intelligence took a form we would not immediately recognize. A species shaped by conditions unlike ours, perhaps smaller or larger, perhaps living in environments where permanence offered no advantage. Their societies might have emphasized mobility over construction, adaptation over modification. Knowledge could have been stored in behavior ritual or biology rather than objects. When such a world ended, it would leave almost nothing for us to find. Forgotten epochs are forgotten precisely because forgetting is built into the planet's design. Subduction zones consume crust older than a certain age, recycling it into the mantle. Metamorphism erases original textures and compositions. Even sedimentary layers, our primary window into the past, are incomplete. Gaps appear where erosion removed entire chapters. What we call the geological record is not continuous. It is a collage. This incompleteness is easy to overlook when studying recent history. We are accustomed to written records, photographs, and digital archives. But even these are fragile. Over centuries, libraries burn files, corrupt languages shift. Extend that fragility across millions of years, and the idea of preservation begins to feel almost absurd. A forgotten epoch does not need to hide. It simply needs time. Myths often emerge from this distance not as records but as reflections. Stories of earlier ages filled with powerful beings or advanced knowledge may not describe literal civilizations. They may instead express an awareness that the present is not absolute, that before us something else unfolded. These stories persist because they resonate with the evidence of change all around us. Fossils embedded in stone coastlines, abandoned far inland deserts that were once seas. In quiet moments, studying maps that show ancient shorelines or climate models that reconstruct long-vanished worlds, a subtle shift occurs. The present begins to feel less central. Human civilization appears as one configuration among many, not the inevitable culmination of history. This perspective does not diminish human achievement. It contextualizes it. Consider how quickly environments can change relative to social structures. A stable climate allows agriculture to flourish. A slight shift disrupts food systems. Repeated often enough, these shifts favor adaptability over permanence. A civilization optimized for one set of conditions may struggle when those conditions fade. Over long enough spans, even highly resilient systems can be undone. If an intelligent species flourished during a forgotten epoch, its decline may not have been dramatic. It may have been gradual, unnoticed from within. Populations thinning, knowledge narrowing, traditions simplifying. By the time the environment stabilized again, little would remain. The Earth would not mark the transition, it would continue. This idea aligns with what we already observe in smaller cycles. Human societies rise, expand, strain and contract. Innovations appear, spread and become mundane. Skills are lost and rediscovered. Over centuries these patterns repeat. Scale them up, and they resemble the rhythms of forgotten epochs. Instruments do not detect intent. They detect consequence. When scientists examine ancient layers, they see outcomes without narratives. Increased erosion, shifts in carbon isotopes, sudden changes in pollen distribution. These signals tell us something happened, but not what it meant. Meaning belongs to the beings who experienced it, and meaning rarely fossilizes. There is a quiet humility in accepting this. The desire to locate ourselves as unique or final fades when viewed against deep time. The planet has hosted countless experiments in life. Some lasted briefly, some endured for hundreds of millions of years. None were permanent. Intelligence, if it arose before, would have followed the same rule. As the night stretches on the idea of forgotten epochs, becomes less speculative and more inevitable. Given enough time, forgetting is the default outcome. Memory is the exception. The Earth does not remember in stories. It remembers in processes. It remembers through cycles that repeat with variation. This perspective invites calm rather than fear. If others existed before us, they were not failures. They were participants. Their disappearance does not diminish their experience, just as our eventual disappearance will not diminish ours. What matters is not endurance, but presence within the moment allowed. Sitting with this thought long after the instruments are silent and the charts are closed, there is a gentle clarity. We are not standing at the centre of history. We are standing within it, briefly illuminated before fading back into the larger pattern. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. A reset, when viewed through human emotion, often feels violent or final, like an ending carved into memory by loss. But when viewed through the lens of planetary time, a reset is quieter, slower, and almost gentle. It is not an act of punishment or correction. It is simply the Earth, adjusting itself, returning to balance in ways that do not consider intention, achievement, or meaning. To the planet, a reset is not a catastrophe. It is maintenance. Traveller, imagine a world where nothing dramatic announces the beginning of an end. No single explosion, no sudden darkness. Instead, small changes accumulate. Rain patterns shift by degrees barely noticed within a lifetime. Seasons stretch or compress. Rivers alter their paths. Coastlines creep inland or retreat outward. Species adapt at first, then struggle, then thin out. From inside the moment it feels like continuity. From far away it is a turning point. Geology teaches us that resets rarely arrive as singular events. Even mass extinctions unfold over spans of time long enough to feel ordinary to those living through them. A volcanic province erupts not once but repeatedly. An asteroid impact triggers climate feedbacks that last centuries. Ice sheets expand gradually, then retreat unevenly. The reset is a process, not a moment. If a civilization existed before ours, its reset would not have announced itself as history ending. It would have appeared as difficulty, crops failing more often, migration becoming necessary, knowledge narrowing to what is immediately useful, complex systems breaking into simpler ones. The idea of collapse implies suddenness, but most resets resemble erosion more than destruction. In this way, a reset does not erase intelligence, it reshapes it. Behaviours that once supported large populations become inefficient. Skills that required stable conditions lose relevance. New strategies emerge smaller, quieter, more adaptable. Intelligence does not disappear. It contracts, concentrates, survives where it can. Over time, what remains no longer resembles what came before. Listener, consider how many resets humanity itself has already endured. Ice ages that forced retreat and innovation. Floods that erased settlements and redrew maps. Volcanic winters that narrowed genetic diversity. Each time, survival required letting go of complexity. Each time, the world that followed was different, even if it felt familiar to those living within it. A planetary reset is not selective. It does not target civilizations. It targets conditions. Anything dependent on those conditions must change or vanish. This is why permanence is rare. Structures assume stability. Knowledge assumes continuity. Culture assumes memory. A reset disrupts all three at once. From orbit resets leave signatures rather than stories. Layers of ash, isotopic shifts, abrupt changes in sediment composition. These signals do not explain themselves. They simply mark that something altered the trajectory of life. When scientists identify these markers, they do not see endings. They see transitions. If an earlier intelligent species experienced a reset, its disappearance would not require failure. It would require misalignment. A set of adaptations no longer fit the environment. Evolution would respond by favouring different traits, perhaps in entirely different lineages. Intelligence could reappear later in a new form disconnected from its predecessor. This is the quiet implication of reset theories. They do not suggest a repeating script but a repeating opportunity. The Earth does not remember what came before in order to recreate it. It simply creates conditions again, and life responds however it can. Sometimes that response includes intelligence, sometimes it does not. Long nights spent studying paleoclimate data reveal this rhythm clearly. Temperature curves rise and fall like slow breathing. Carbon levels spike and settle. Biodiversity expands and contracts. None of these patterns imply intention. Yet together they form a structure that repeats. The reset is built into the system. There is a subtle comfort in this realization. It removes the burden of uniqueness. If humanity is not the first to navigate complexity, then our challenges are not unprecedented. They are expressions of a broader pattern. Resource strain, environmental feedback, social tension. These are not failures of character. They are features of systems approaching their limits. A reset does not require total erasure to be effective. It only requires enough change to make previous solutions obsolete. Writing may persist, but the language fades. Tools may remain, but their purpose is forgotten. What survives is not the civilization, but fragments shaped into new contexts. In forgotten epochs, resets may have occurred so completely that even fragments vanished. Not because nothing existed, but because nothing aligned with preservation. Heat, pressure, chemistry, and time worked together to smooth the surface, until no distinction remained between what was made and what was natural. This possibility challenges the instinct to search for ruins. A reset does not promise ruins. It promises continuity in altered form. The absence of evidence is not a mystery in need of explanation. It is the expected outcome of deep time operating as designed. As the idea settles, it reframes the present moment. Humanity stands within conditions that support complexity, global networks, and abstract knowledge. These conditions are not permanent. They are temporary alignments. Recognizing this does not demand despair. It invites awareness. A reset is not inherently negative. It clears constraints as much as it removes structures. It opens space for new configurations of life. What follows is not a repetition, but a divergence. The planet moves forward without nostalgia. Somewhere in the silence of deep time, countless resets have already occurred. Some erased simple ecosystems, some reshaped entire biospheres. If intelligence was among the casualties, it was not singled out. It was simply one more pattern, altered by shifting conditions. And if intelligence emerged again afterward, it would do so without memory of what came before. No inheritance, no warning. Only the same physical laws, the same planet rearranged. In the end, traveller, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. An echo is not a memory. It does not know where it came from, only that something once moved strongly enough to leave a trace. When sound rebounds through a canyon, it carries no meaning, no intention, only shape. In the same way, if earlier civilizations existed, what remains of them would not be stories or artifacts, but echoes, patterns that repeat without explanation, behaviours that reappear without lineage, ideas that feel strangely familiar even when they are newly discovered. Observe and consider how often humanity encounters this feeling of recognition, not the sharp certainty of remembering, but the softer sensation of having arrived somewhere already prepared. Certain solutions appear inevitable. Agriculture emerges independently in distant regions. Writing takes shape in unrelated cultures. Architecture converges on similar forms. These parallels do not require contact. They arise because intelligence, when pressed by similar constraints, tends to bend in similar directions. An echo does not imply that something was copied. It implies that the environment channels responses into predictable paths. Gravity pulls matter into spheres. Fluid dynamics shapes rivers the same way everywhere. Intelligence, constrained by physics, biology, and energy, may be guided towards certain outcomes again and again. If an earlier civilization once followed these paths, humanity may now be walking along similar contours without ever knowing they were traced before. In long nights surrounded by star charts and geological maps, this repetition becomes hard to ignore. The universe favors efficiency. Systems settle into stable configurations. When those configurations are disrupted, new ones form that often resemble the old. The echo is not personal, it is structural. This is why some discoveries feel less like inventions and more like uncovering something already waiting. A mathematical relationship that seems inevitable, a technological principle that feels obvious once revealed. These moments can feel uncanny not because they are supernatural, but because they reflect deep constraints shaping thought. Intelligence does not roam freely. It moves within corridors defined by reality itself. If an earlier intelligent species existed, its echoes would not survive as tools or texts. They would survive as tendencies, ways of organizing space, approaches to problem solving, preferences for symmetry, rhythm, repetition. These qualities are not learned culturally alone. They're reinforced by how minds interact with the physical world. Myths may also function as echoes. Flood stories, cycles of ages fallen, golden eras. These narratives appear across cultures without shared origin. They may reflect real environmental changes experienced by humans, but they may also arise from a deeper intuition that stability is temporary, that worlds rise and fall, that renewal follows loss. Even without inherited memory, the shape of the story repeats. Echoes are strongest where records are weakest, in gaps, in transitions, in moments where history blurs. The fossil record shows sudden appearances and disappearances that resist simple explanation. Geological layers mark abrupt shifts in climate or chemistry. These are not messages, they are disturbances. But disturbances are how echoes manifest in stone. Human intuition often fills these gaps with speculation, but the quieter approach is to notice repetition without assigning cause. An echo does not prove origin, it only signals recurrence. The danger lies in mistaking familiarity for inheritance. The value lies in recognizing pattern without forcing narrative. Listener, reflect on how personal echoes shape your own life. Habits you thought you had outgrown return under pressure. Decisions repeat themselves in new contexts. Societies behave the same way. Growth, expansion, complexity strain simplification. The cycle is visible whether or not one believes in earlier civilizations. The echo exists regardless of its source. If intelligence arose millions of years ago and vanished, its echo would not be emotional. It would not mourn itself. It would persist as structure. As the same challenges encountered again, as the same solutions rediscovered, as the same limitations confronted from different starting points. This perspective softens the search for origins. Instead of asking who came before, it asks how often the same patterns can emerge. Instead of hunting for proof, it observes alignment. Instead of insisting on continuity, it accepts recurrence. In this sense, humanity may be living inside an echo without realizing it, not repeating specific actions, but navigating the same constraints. Limited resources, changing climates, expanding complexity. The echo does not predict outcome. It only suggests that paths narrow as systems grow. The universe is indifferent to novelty. It does not reward originality for its own sake. It rewards stability. When stability fails, it permits transformation. Intelligence is caught within this dynamic. It is neither protected nor targeted, it simply responds. Echoes do not fade quickly. They persist as long as conditions allow repetition. Even if no intelligence existed before humanity, the idea of echoes remains useful. It frames civilization not as an anomaly but as a phase, not as a peak but as a configuration. Somewhere in the deep past, life responded to opportunity and constraint in ways now erased. Somewhere in the deep future, life may do the same again. The echo does not belong to us. We pass through it. In the quiet hours when instruments hum softly and data scrolls without urgency, this realization brings calm rather than dread. There is no burden to be unique, no obligation to be final, only participation. If earlier civilizations existed, their echoes are not warnings. They are reminders that complexity is temporary, that intelligence is adaptive, that silence eventually follows noise, and in that silence patterns wait to form again. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Patterns are not plans. They do not decide outcomes or promise repetition with precision. They simply emerge when systems interact long enough under the same rules. In the universe, patterns appear wherever matter, energy, and time are allowed to move freely. Stars form in spirals, storms rotate coastlines, fracture into familiar shapes. Intelligence, if it arises more than once, would not escape this tendency. It would follow patterns not because it remembers, but because the world shapes what is possible. Traveller, think of how often history seems to rhyme without repeating itself. Civilizations separated by oceans and millennia develop similar tools, similar hierarchies, similar struggles. This is not coincidence, it is constraint. When populations grow beyond a certain size, coordination becomes necessary. When coordination becomes complex, systems form. When systems grow, they strain. These transitions appear again and again not because they are taught, but because they are required. Patterns reveal themselves most clearly when viewed from a distance. Up close, every society feels unique, shaped by its own choices and circumstances. But from far away, the outlines align. Expansion follows stability. Stability invites complexity. Complexity creates vulnerability. Vulnerability invites simplification. This rhythm does not care who participates. It unfolds wherever conditions allow it. Geology mirrors this logic. Mountain ranges rise through compression, then erode through exposure. Rivers carve valleys, then fill them. Oceans open and close. The planet does not preserve states. It cycles through configurations. Life adapts to each phase, and intelligence, if present, adapts with it. Patterns emerge not because the planet intends them, but because change is structured. In the laboratory, long-term data sets reveal this same quiet order. Climate oscillates within bounds, occasionally crossing thresholds that trigger rapid shifts. Carbon moves between reservoirs. Ice advances and retreats. Each cycle leaves marks not as narratives but as curves and layers. The language of patterns is statistical, not symbolic. If an earlier civilization existed, it would have lived inside these patterns without seeing them fully. No society perceives its own arc clearly. Change feels gradual. Adjustments feel temporary. Only later does the pattern become obvious. This is not failure. It is perspective. Observer, consider how modern humans interpret progress. We imagine a forward motion and ascent driven by knowledge and technology. Yet each advance introduces dependencies. Energy systems require stability. Information networks require trust. Global structures require cooperation across scales that strain human psychology. These are not flaws. They are natural consequences of complexity. Patterns do not forbid intelligence. They limit it. They define the boundaries within which it can operate. When those boundaries shift, intelligence must respond or recede. If it cannot, it simplifies or disappears. This does not require catastrophe. It requires misalignment. In ancient sediments, patterns appear as abrupt transitions. Species diversify, then decline. Ecosystems reorganize. These shifts often correlate with environmental thresholds being crossed. Temperature, acidity, atmospheric composition. Life responds predictably, even if the specific forms change. The pattern remains. The same logic applies to societies. When resource availability changes, social structures adjust. When adjustments lag behind reality, strain accumulates. Eventually, systems reorganize, sometimes violently, often quietly. The pattern is visible only after the fact. Patterns also explain why warnings are rarely heeded. Within a stable phase, signals of change appear as noise. Data points fluctuate. Models disagree. Uncertainty dominates. It is only when a threshold is crossed that the pattern clarifies. By then, adaptation is urgent rather than deliberate. If earlier intelligent species existed, they may have faced similar blind spots. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because intelligence evolved to navigate immediate environments, not deep time. Pattern recognition has limits. It works best at scales relevant to survival. This understanding reframes the search for predecessors. Instead of asking where they went, it asks how they fit into planetary patterns. Their disappearance would not be anomalous. It would be consistent. Their absence would not be mysterious. It would be expected. Patterns do not preserve identity. They preserve structure. What comes next does not inherit what came before. It emerges fresh within the same constraints. The planet does not care who fills the role of intelligence. It cares only that life responds to conditions. In this light, humanity's story becomes less isolated. We are not an exception interrupting an otherwise empty timeline. We are a phase, one expression of a repeating possibility. That does not diminish significance. It contextualizes it. Some patterns are comforting. Day follows night. Seasons return. Others are unsettling. Growth leads to strain. Stability invites fragility. These are not moral lessons. They are system behaviors. The universe does not judge them. In quiet moments, studying long graphs of planetary change, this neutrality becomes clear. There is no preference embedded in the data. Only relationships. Variables influencing variables. Outcomes following conditions. If intelligence appears again in the future, it will likely rediscover similar patterns. It will believe its challenges are unprecedented. It will feel unique. Only much later might it see the rhythm it inhabits. This is the paradox of patterns. They are obvious in retrospect and invisible in real time. They require distance. Distance requires time. Time erases details. Understanding this brings a kind of peace. It removes the urgency to assign meaning where structure suffices. It allows curiosity without anxiety. It allows humility without despair. Somewhere in the silence of deep time, patterns continue whether anyone observes them or not. They do not wait for witnesses. They do not require memory. Tonight the universe whispers again. In the end, traveller, some mysteries wait. A warning does not always arrive as a sound loud enough to demand attention. In the natural world, the most consequential warnings are often quiet, embedded in slow trends rather than sudden alarms. Temperatures rise by fractions. Seasons drift out of alignment. Systems strain not all at once, but unevenly, creating discomfort rather than catastrophe. To those living within the moment, it feels manageable. To those looking back, it reads as inevitability. Traveller. If earlier civilizations existed, their warnings would not have appeared as visions of collapse. They would have appeared as subtle signals that something no longer fit as it once had. A river that flooded more often. A coastline that shifted a little too far inland. Resources that required more effort to extract. These were not prophecies. They were feedback. Science teaches that complex systems rarely fail because of a single cause. They fail because small stresses accumulate faster than adaptation can respond. Climate ecosystems and societies behave this way. Each can absorb disturbance up to a point. Beyond that point, stability becomes fragile and small changes trigger larger transformations. The warning is not the transformation itself. The warning is the loss of resilience beforehand. In geological records, this loss appears as instability. Fluctuations increase. Variability grows. The system oscillates more wildly before reorganizing. These patterns are visible in ice cores, sediment layers, and fossil distributions. They suggest that the planet signals change long before the change completes. But signals require interpretation, and interpretation requires context. Listener, consider how difficult it is to recognize warnings in real time. Human perception evolved to notice immediate threats, not gradual shifts. A predator commands attention. A trend does not. When conditions deteriorate slowly, adaptation becomes normalization. What once felt abnormal becomes routine. The warning dissolves into daily life. If an earlier intelligent species faced environmental limits, it would not necessarily understand them as limits. It might interpret them as temporary challenges, local anomalies, or problems solvable with existing tools. This is not ignorance. It is optimism shaped by prior success. When systems work for long enough, confidence grows. Warnings also compete with incentives. Growth rewards expansion. Complexity rewards efficiency. Systems optimized for success resist reduction even when reduction becomes necessary. This tension is visible in every known civilization. It does not require moral failure. It arises from structure. The planet issues warnings without language. It speaks through probability distributions, shifting baselines, altered feedback loops. These signals are legible only when observed patiently across time. Even then, uncertainty remains. Models disagree. Data lags reality. Decisions are made within incomplete understanding. If earlier civilizations existed, their warnings may have been understood too late or not at all. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because intelligence does not grant foresight beyond available evidence. The deeper the timeline, the harder the interpretation. Warnings are also relative. What threatens one system may benefit another. Climate shifts that collapse one ecosystem open niches for others. The planet does not warn universally. It adjusts. Life responds unevenly. Intelligence is just one responder among many. From a cosmic perspective, warnings are irrelevant. Stars burn until fuel runs out. Orbits shift over eons. Radiation bathes everything indiscriminately. The universe does not signal intention. It follows law. The only warnings that exist are those inferred by observers who care about continuity. This reframes the idea of a warning entirely. It is not a message meant to be heeded. It is a pattern meant to be noticed. The difference matters. Messages assume sender and receiver. Patterns require only observation. Observer imagines standing within a system that has not yet crossed its threshold. Everything still functions. Problems feel solvable. The future appears open. In that moment, a warning does not feel urgent. It feels abstract. It competes with the demands of the present. History suggests that civilizations rarely act decisively on abstract warnings. Action follows consequence, not prediction. This is not a flaw unique to humanity. It is a feature of cognition shaped by survival in uncertain environments. If earlier civilizations existed, their warnings would now be silent. Not because they were ignored, but because the context that made them meaningful no longer exists. What remains is not advice, but absence. That absence itself functions as a warning to those who notice it. Not a directive, but a reminder. Complex systems do not fail loudly. They drift into instability and reorganize. The warning is visible only when viewed across scales larger than individual lives. This realization carries no accusation. It carries perspective. It suggests that awareness alone does not guarantee prevention. Understanding patterns does not grant control over them. The universe allows observation, not exemption. In long hours spent reviewing planetary data, this limitation becomes clear. Even with advanced instruments and models, prediction remains probabilistic. Confidence is always provisional. The future resists precision. Warnings, then, are less about avoiding outcomes and more about understanding position. They tell you where you stand within a trajectory, not how to escape it. They invite humility rather than certainty. If humanity is living within such a warning phase, it does not mean collapse is imminent. It means alignment is shifting. Conditions are changing. Responses matter, but outcomes remain open. If earlier civilizations reached similar moments, their stories ended, not because they failed to listen, but because systems moved beyond configurations they could sustain. This does not diminish their existence. It contextualizes it. Warnings are not judgments. They are signals embedded in change. They do not insist. They reveal. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. The sky has always been the quiet witness to everything that rises and falls below it. Long before the first stone was shaped by hands, long before any species learned to name itself the sky, watched continents drift and oceans open and close. It did not record these events. It did not remember them. It simply remained vast and indifferent, offering the same stars to every age that dared to look upward. Traveller. When ancient people looked to the sky, they were not searching for escape. They were searching for orientation. The movements above were slow, predictable, reassuring in their consistency. While the earth shifted beneath their feet, the heavens appeared stable, ordered, untouched by decay. This contrast shaped the earliest ideas of permanence. What changed belonged to the ground. What endured belonged to the sky. Astronomy reveals a quieter truth. The sky is not fixed. Stars are born and die. Galaxies collide. Orbits decay. The difference is scale. Change in the sky unfolds over spans of time so vast that it feels eternal to those bound to short lives. The illusion of permanence arises not from stability, but from slowness. If earlier civilizations existed, their relationship with the sky may have mirrored our own. They would have noticed patterns before they noticed causes, cycles before mechanisms, the repetition of seasons, the return of certain stars, the slow drift of constellations across generations. These observations require patience, not technology. They invite reflection rather than control. The sky teaches humility by refusing immediacy. Nothing there responds to urgency. No plea alters an orbit. No fear changes a stellar life cycle. In this way, the sky becomes a mirror for intelligence itself. It reveals the limits of agency. It reminds observers that understanding does not equal influence. Listener, imagine a civilization watching the sky during its own period of expansion. Night after night, the same stars return. Decades pass, centuries pass. Nothing above seems to acknowledge the transformations below. Cities grow, networks spread, knowledge accumulates. Yet the sky remains unmoved. This contrast can create confidence. It can also create blindness. Civilizations often mistake the sky's indifference for endorsement. If the heavens remain unchanged, the thinking goes, then progress is safe. But the sky does not signal approval. It simply operates on timelines that ignore human concerns. The same stars shone over eras that ended without warning. The sky also carries records invisible to the naked eye. Radiation from ancient events still passes through space. Light emitted billions of years ago arrives now, long after its source has changed or vanished. In this sense, the sky is not empty. It is layered with delayed information, signals without context, messages without sender. These signals remind us that observation always occurs after the fact. By the time light reaches an observer, its origin has already moved on. The universe is never seen as it is only as it was. This delay is small on human scales, immense on cosmic ones. It reframes the idea of knowledge entirely. If earlier civilizations studied the sky, their conclusions would have been shaped by the same constraint. They would have interpreted patterns without access to causes. They might have built calendars, myths, or models that made sense within their time. Those frameworks would feel complete until new data disrupted them. Human astronomy followed this path. Geocentric models worked until they did not. Static universes felt reasonable until expansion was discovered. Each correction did not erase what came before, it refined it. Knowledge grows not by replacement, but by adjustment. The sky encourages this kind of thinking. It does not offer final answers. It offers better approximations. Each discovery reveals deeper uncertainty. Dark matter, dark energy, cosmic inflation. These concepts expand understanding while admitting ignorance. The more is known, the larger the unknown becomes. This expansion does not threaten meaning. It deepens it. It places intelligence within a vast system that does not revolve around it. If earlier civilizations existed, their sky would have told them the same thing, even if they lacked the language to articulate it. The sky also connects distant times. The same celestial mechanics governed the planet millions of years ago. The same gravitational relationships shaped tides, seasons, and climates. These forces influenced evolution long before intelligence emerged. They continue to influence it now. If a civilization rose under a particular sky configuration, its development would have been shaped subtly by celestial rhythms. Seasonal cycles determine agriculture. Lunar cycles influence behavior. Solar variability affects climate. These influences are quiet but persistent. A change in the sky does not need to be dramatic to matter. A slight shift in orbit, a change in axial tilt, a variation in solar output. Over long periods, these adjustments reshape environments. They alter what life can sustain. They participate in resets without spectacle. Looking upward, it becomes clear that the sky does not mark beginnings or endings. It marks continuity. It provides a backdrop against which change becomes visible. Without the sky's relative stability, the Earth's transformations would be harder to perceive. In observatories where instruments track faint movements across darkness, there is a shared understanding. The sky is not a destination. It is a reference frame. It allows intelligence to situate itself within something larger. If humanity is a reset of something older, the sky has watched it all. Not with awareness, but with persistence. It offered the same light to every attempt at meaning. It did not intervene. It did not remember. This is the sky's lesson. Permanence is an illusion created by scale. Continuity does not imply preservation. Observation does not grant exemption. Yet there is comfort here. The sky does not judge the briefness of civilizations. It does not weigh their success or failure. It simply continues offering context to whatever arises beneath it. Tonight, as you imagined earlier, worlds gazing upward in their own time know that the same stars now look back at you, not as witnesses, not as guardians, but as reminders of proportion. In the end, traveller silence is the universe thinking. Earth is not a stage built for permanence. It is a process in motion, a surface constantly rewritten by forces that do not pause to preserve meaning. Mountains rise only to be ground down. Seas advance and retreat. Forests grow, collapse, and are replaced by entirely different ecosystems that leave behind no memory of what stood before. What feels solid beneath human feet is to the planet only a temporary arrangement of matter. Traveller to understand Earth is to accept that stability is an exception, not a rule. The continents themselves are migrants drifting slowly across the mantle, colliding, separating, reshaping climates and coastlines in silence. Entire oceans have vanished. Entire land masses have sunk beneath waves. The ground beneath cities today may once have been seabed, jungle, desert or ice, and will become something else again long after names have faded. Geology does not move with urgency. It moves with patience. Pressure accumulates grain by grain. Heat migrates slowly upward. Faults lock and release over spans that dwarf any civilization. When change finally becomes visible, it feels sudden only because human attention is short. To Earth, it is the natural conclusion of a long preparation. If earlier civilizations existed, they would not have lived on a different planet. They would have lived on this one shaped by the same tectonic tensions, the same cycles of erosion and renewal. Their cities, if they built them, would have rested on ground already destined to move. Their borders would have been drawn on surfaces that never intended to hold still. Earth does not erase with intent. It dissolves distinction through continuity. Stone becomes sediment. Sediment becomes rock. Rock becomes molten again. In this cycle, the difference between natural formation and deliberate construction slowly disappears. Given enough time, a wall becomes indistinguishable from a ridge, a road from a riverbed, a foundation from a seam of mineral. Listener, consider how fragile evidence truly is. Most materials favoured by life decay quickly. Wood returns to soil. Fibre breaks down. Even metal corrodes, reacts, disperses. What survives does so accidentally protected by rare conditions that delay the inevitable. Fossils form not because life was meant to be remembered, but because burial happened to occur at the right moment. This is why absence should never be mistaken for emptiness. Earth has hosted far more than it has preserved. Whole eras are represented by thin layers of rock compressed into silence. What we call history is not a record of everything that happened. It is a narrow sampling shaped by chance. The planet does not curate its past, it recycles it. Subduction zones swallow crust. Volcanoes resurface landscapes, glaciers scrape memory clean, rivers grind structures into fragments and scatter them downstream. The Earth is not hostile to civilization, it is indifferent to it. If intelligence arose millions of years ago, Earth would not have adjusted to accommodate it. Intelligence would have had to adapt to Earth's rhythms or fade with conditions that no longer supported it. This is not cruelty. It is scale. The planet does not privilege complexity. It responds to physics. Even today, Earth continues this work quietly. Soils shift, water tables move, coastlines retreat. These changes rarely register as existential until thresholds are crossed. From within a lifetime, the ground feels stable. From the view of deep time, nothing stands still. Earth's memory is layered but incomplete. Each layer compresses what came before, smoothing detail, removing edges. The deeper one looks, the less resolution remains. This is not a flaw. It is a consequence of compression. Pressure simplifies, heat transforms. This is why searching for earlier civilizations through the lens of permanence misunderstands the planet. Earth does not store stories. It stores processes. What survives is not intention, but outcome. Not culture, but chemistry. Not identity, but pattern. Observer imagined standing in a place where countless worlds have already existed without leaving names behind. The ground beneath you has carried ecosystems older than mammals, climates unfamiliar to modern experienced skies, with different colours and compositions. Earth has never been empty. It has only been unfamiliar. Life adapts to whatever Earth becomes. When oxygen rose, new forms emerged. When ice spread, others retreated. Intelligence, if it is one possible adaptation among many, would follow the same rule. It appears when conditions allow it. It recedes when they do not. This does not diminish the present moment. It contextualizes it. Humanity's cities, languages, sciences, and arts exist within a narrow window of environmental alignment. That window feels wide only because it is all we know. Earth has closed many such windows before. Understanding Earth requires surrendering the idea of inheritance. The planet does not pass lessons forward. Each era begins without guidance. Whatever emerges must learn again how to live within the constraints it inherits. There is no continuity of wisdom across deep time, only recurrence of conditions. Yet there is a strange peace in this. Earth does not rush. It does not judge outcomes. It allows complexity to bloom and collapse without preference. What survives does so because it fits, not because it deserves to. If earlier civilizations existed, Earth did not betray them. It simply continued. And if humanity someday fades, Earth will not mark the loss. It will absorb the remains and move on, carrying life forward in other forms. This perspective does not demand despair. It invites humility. To live on Earth is to participate in a moment, not to command a future. Meaning is not diminished by impermanence. It is sharpened by it. In the quiet hours when maps lie dusty on tables and instruments tick softly, Earth feels less like a home built for us, and more like a companion moving alongside us, unconcerned with our narratives yet inseparable from our existence. Somewhere beneath your feet, layers of forgotten worlds press together, silent and complete in their disappearance. In the end, Traveller Earth remembers nothing and continues everything. Her return does not mean going backward. It does not imply reversal repetition, or the undoing of what has already unfolded. In the language of deep time, a return is a realignment, a moment when conditions resemble something that once existed, even though everything within them is new. The Earth has returned to similar states many times before, not because it remembers, but because physics allows only so many stable arrangements. Traveller. When intelligence looks back toward the possibility of earlier civilizations, it is often driven by a quiet instinct to locate itself, to know whether this moment is unique or familiar, to understand whether what we experience now is unprecedented or simply another appearance of something the planet has already hosted. This instinct is not about nostalgia, it is about orientation. In scientific work, return appears everywhere. Ice cores reveal cycles of cooling and warming that repeat with variations. Sediment layers show familiar sequences of deposition and erosion. Even the chemistry of the atmosphere oscillates within broad limits over millions of years. These returns are not exact. Each cycle differs in detail, but the structure remains recognizable. If intelligence is one possible outcome of certain environmental alignments, then its appearance would also follow this logic. When energy is abundant, climates are relatively stable, and ecosystems can support specialization. Complex cognition becomes viable. When those conditions fade, intelligence becomes costly, fragile, difficult to sustain. A return, then, is not a resurrection of a lost world, but a reopening of opportunity. Listener, consider how often humanity itself experiences returns on smaller scales. Old ideas regain relevance. Forgotten technologies reappear in new forms. Agricultural practices once abandoned are rediscovered under pressure. This is not because knowledge travels intact across time, but because similar problems demand similar responses. The world invites the same solutions again and again. A return does not carry memory, it carries constraint. The same laws shape outcomes whenever conditions align. Gravity does not learn. Chemistry does not adapt. Evolution responds to pressures that repeat in familiar ways. Intelligence bound by biology and physics cannot escape this framework. If earlier civilizations existed, their return would not be cultural or genetic. It would be structural. The planet would again support minds capable of abstraction, cooperation, and tool use. Those minds would feel as new to themselves as we do now. They would not recognize the ground beneath them as reused. To them it would simply be home. This realization reframes the search for origins. The question shifts from who came before us to what conditions allow minds like ours to arise. The return is not of identity, but of possibility. It is not a lineage, but a window. In astronomy, return appears as orbital resonance. Bodies fall into repeating paths because those paths are stable. Deviations dampen out. Chaos settles into pattern. The same principle applies to planetary systems, climates, and biospheres. Stability attracts repetition. Earth has returned to forested states after ice ages. It has returned to oxygen-rich atmospheres after near depletion. It has returned to warm, shallow seas after global freezes. Each return brought new life, not the old. The planet does not rewind. It recomposes. Observer imagines standing at the edge of such a return without knowing it. Life feels ordinary. Progress feels linear. The past appears distant and resolved. Yet beneath that sense of continuity, conditions are quietly aligning just as they have before. The return is invisible from the inside. This invisibility is important. It prevents anticipation from shaping behavior. It ensures that whatever emerges does so naturally without rehearsal. If intelligence is to arise again after us, it will do so without awareness of what humanity once was. It will not inherit our fears or hopes. It will simply respond. The idea of return also dissolves the need for endings. If civilizations are phases rather than finales, then disappearance is not failure, it is transition. The Earth does not mourn lost configurations, it rearranges them into new ones. In long nights spent reviewing timelines that stretch beyond intuition, this perspective becomes grounding. It removes urgency without removing meaning. What exists now matters because it exists now, not because it must last forever. Participation is enough. A return does not promise improvement. It does not guarantee that what follows will be better or worse. It only suggests continuity of process. The same forces will shape future intelligence as shaped past intelligence. Outcomes will differ, but constraints remain. Humanity may itself be living during a return phase. Conditions favourable to complexity have reappeared after long instability. Whether this is the first time or the latest time is unknowable, but the structure of the moment feels familiar when viewed through deep time. Energy flows are high. Information spreads rapidly. Systems interconnect tightly. These are hallmarks of opportunity and of vulnerability. The return, then, is not a destination. It is a crossing, a period where multiple paths are possible. The Earth does not choose among them. It allows variation. Selection follows. If earlier civilizations existed, their return would not be visible to us. It would have already happened long before we evolved, leaving no marker we could recognize. Or it may not have happened yet. The planet is patient. Understanding return means releasing the desire for narrative closure. There is no final chapter, only transitions between configurations. Intelligence appears, adapts, fades, and may appear again under different forms. This does not reduce wonder. It expands it. It places humanity within a broader rhythm that does not depend on us yet includes us fully. We are not isolated. We are participating. In quiet moments when attention drifts and certainty softens, the idea of return feels less like speculation and more like acceptance. The world has room for many stories, most of which will never be told. And if intelligence does return again someday, it will look up at the same sky stand on the same earth and ask the same questions, unaware that those questions have already been asked before. In the end, traveller, you're not standing at the centre of time. You're passing through one of its many openings. Reflection is not an answer seeking its conclusion. It is a pause where movement slows enough for patterns to be felt rather than solved. In the quiet space between certainty and doubt, reflection allows meaning to exist without resolution. When contemplating the possibility of earlier civilizations and repeated resets, reflection becomes the natural response not because the mystery demands closure, but because the mind needs stillness to hold something vast. Traveller reflection begins when the urge to prove fades, when the search for evidence softens into observation. The question of whether we are a reset of something older becomes less about confirmation and more about position. Where do we stand within the long motion of the planet? What does it mean to exist briefly within processes that stretch beyond imagination? Scientific reflection often looks like restraint. Data is gathered, patterns are noted, conclusions are delayed. This is not hesitation, it is respect for complexity. In geology, astronomy, and evolutionary biology, the most responsible statements are often the quietest ones. We describe what is likely, we acknowledge what is unknown, we leave room for what has not yet been seen. Reflection also accepts that absence carries meaning. The lack of clear evidence for earlier civilizations does not close the question, it reframes it. Earth's processes are efficient at erasing detail, deep time smooths distinctions, smooths. What remains is not narrative but structure. Understanding this shifts the focus from artifacts to conditions, from objects to systems. Listener reflection invites humility without diminishing curiosity. It allows us to say we do not know, and that is sufficient. The planet does not require our certainty to continue. The universe does not wait for our conclusions. Reflection aligns intelligence with scale rather than placing it above it. In personal moments, long nights with instruments humming dust settling on forgotten maps. Reflection feels like companionship rather than isolation. There is comfort in knowing that uncertainty is shared across disciplines and eras. Scientists, philosophers, and observers across history have all stood before the same silence, drawing different shapes around the same unknown. Reflection also dissolves urgency. If intelligence is a recurring possibility rather than a singular miracle, then the present moment does not carry the burden of finality. Our actions matter, but they do not need to be eternal. Meaning exists within participation, not permanence. This perspective softens fear without encouraging apathy. When reflecting on resets, it becomes clear that endings are rarely sharp. They blur into transitions. What one era calls collapse, another calls transformation. Reflection allows both views to coexist. It recognizes loss without dramatizing it and change without moralizing it. The reflective mind notices that even within recorded history, civilizations rarely understood their own position. They interpreted continuity where disruption was already underway. Reflection then is often retrospective. It requires distance, and distance is something the present never has. This limitation does not invalidate reflection. It grounds it. We reflect not to predict outcomes, but to situate ourselves, to recognize that we are moving even when the motion feels subtle, to sense that the present is neither a beginning nor an end, but a crossing. Observer reflection reveals that the most persistent human questions are not technical, but positional. Where are we? How long has this been happening? Will it happen again? These questions survive because they are never fully answered. Each generation reframes them within its own context. If earlier civilizations existed, reflection is the only bridge we can build toward them. Not through proof, but through analogy. Through understanding how systems behave, how intelligence adapts, how environments constrain outcomes. Reflection does not reconstruct the past, it aligns us with its dynamics. In this alignment, fear loses its grip. The idea that humanity may not be unique becomes less threatening and more grounding. Uniqueness implies isolation. Recurrence implies belonging. To be part of a pattern is not to be insignificant, it is to be integrated. Reflection also exposes the limits of language. Words like civilization, intelligence, progress, these are human constructs applied to phenomena that may not fit them neatly. Reflection loosens these definitions, allowing other possibilities to exist without needing names. This openness is essential. It prevents the mind from closing around assumptions shaped by short timelines. It allows intelligence to remain flexible, responsive, and aware of its own constraints. Reflection is not passive, it is adaptive. In the quietest sense, reflection is an act of trust. Trust that meaning does not require mastery. Trust that understanding can be partial and still valuable. Trust that the universe does not demand interpretation to remain coherent. As the thought of ancient resets settles, reflection shifts attention back to the present, not as a center, but as a moment. This moment is shaped by forces that existed long before us, and will continue long after. Reflection does not ask us to control these forces, it asks us to recognize them. In doing so, it reframes responsibility. Responsibility is not about defying patterns, it is about navigating within them consciously. Awareness does not guarantee success, but it deepens participation. It allows choices to be made with context rather than illusion. Reflection also carries gentleness. It removes the pressure to solve mysteries meant to remain open. Some questions function best as companions rather than problems. They walk alongside thought, shaping perspective without demanding resolution. In the end, reflection does not answer whether we are a reset of the first civilization. It answers a quieter question: how do we exist within uncertainty? The response is not fear, not denial, but presence. Tonight the universe whispers again, and in that whisper, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Descent is not falling. It is a gradual release of tension, a slow lowering into a depth where edges soften, and urgency loosens its grip. In the context of vast time and quiet cycles, descent feels natural, almost invited. After reflection comes this gentle inward turn where thought no longer tries to hold the universe in focus, but allows it to blur into atmosphere. Traveller. The mind does not need to remain alert to remain aware. Awareness can exist without effort, drifting like dust in a beam of low light. As the ideas of resets, echoes, patterns, and returns settle, they no longer demand analysis. They become background like distant stars, barely visible through thin cloud. Present, but no longer insistent. Scientific understanding often ends not in certainty, but in calm acceptance. After long nights of observation, after graphs and instruments and numbers, there is a moment when the data no longer adds urgency. The conclusions are provisional, the unknown remains, and yet the body understands it is time to rest. Descent begins there. In this descent, the universe does not grow darker, it grows quieter. The noise of explanation fades first, then the pressure to connect every idea. What remains is a sense of scale, wide and gentle. The earth continues its motion. The sky continues its slow changes. Life continues to adapt and reorganize. None of this requires your attention right now. Listener, imagine the planet beneath you breathing on geological time. Not inhales and exhales as we know them, but expansions and contractions of heat, water, stone, and life. These motions do not interrupt sleep. They support it. They remind the body that continuity exists without vigilance. As descent deepens, the idea of being a reset loses its sharpness. It no longer feels like a question to be answered. It feels like a context to rest within. Whether humanity is first or one of many no longer matters in this moment. What matters is participation in the present breath, the present stillness. Sleep has always been humanity's most consistent surrender to uncertainty. Each night, consciousness loosens its hold without guarantees. It trusts that the world will continue without supervision. This trust mirrors the larger acceptance of deep time. The universe does not require watchfulness. It operates regardless. In the descent towards sleep, the mind may revisit images without direction. Ancient coastlines shifting under slow tides. Stars crossing the sky at barely perceptible speed. Layers of rock pressing together in silence. These images do not form a story. They form a rhythm. Rhythm is enough. Observer. There is no need to carry conclusions into sleep. The work of understanding does not continue there. Instead, sleep allows integration without language. Patterns settle into intuition. Questions lose their edges. The nervous system recognizes that it is safe to release. This descent is not forgetting, it is rebalancing. Just as ecosystems reorganize after disruption, the mind reorganizes after contemplation. Sleep is not an absence of thought, but a different mode of processing, one that does not require conscious effort. The idea of ancient civilizations fading without trace aligns naturally with sleep. Both involve letting go of form while continuity remains. Memory dissolves, but existence persists. In sleep, identity softens without vanishing. The body remains. The world continues. As attention drifts, the universe no longer feels vast or overwhelming. It feels supportive. Large systems carry small ones effortlessly. Gravity holds planets. Atmospheres hold life. Sleep holds awareness without demand. There is something deeply human in allowing oneself to be small within something immense. Descent invites this humility without discomfort. You're not required to witness everything. You're allowed to rest within it. If earlier civilizations existed, they slept too, under different skies, on different continents, with different understandings of the world, yet sleep would have felt the same. A temporary release into darkness that was not threatening, but restorative. This shared act across time creates a quiet continuity, not of knowledge or culture, but of experience, the act of closing eyes, of trusting the body, of letting the world move without conscious guidance. Descent does not erase curiosity. It suspends it gently. Tomorrow questions may return, or they may not. Either outcome is acceptable. The universe does not measure worth by wakefulness. As sleep approaches, thoughts slow to the pace of breath. Inhale, exhale. The earth continues turning. The sky continues its patient transformations. Somewhere beyond perception, deep time unfolds exactly as it always has. Nothing is required of you now. Not understanding, not interpretation, not vigilance. The systems discussed do not pause when you sleep. They do not need permission. This realization carries relief. The universe is competent without us. The planet knows how to continue. Life adapts whether observed or not. Intelligence does not hold the weight of existence on its shoulders. Descent is complete when the mind accepts this fully, when the last effort to remain aware dissolves, when the boundary between thought and silence becomes indistinct. In this space, fear cannot follow, nor can urgency. Only presence remains thin and gentle, ready to fade. Sleep traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. Final does not mean ending. It means arriving at a quiet place where movement slows enough to be felt rather than measured. In deep time, there are no conclusions, only pauses where one configuration gives way to another. This final moment is not a closing door, but a soft threshold where awareness rests, without needing to decide what comes next. Traveller, everything explored so far points toward a simple truth, hidden beneath complexity. The universe does not hurry, and it does not require certainty. Civilizations rise and fade, landscapes shift, intelligence appears, adapts, and sometimes disappears without leaving a clear trace. None of this interrupts the larger continuity. It is how continuity is maintained. From the widest perspective, humanity is neither early nor late. We exist where conditions allow us to exist. The same was true for anything that may have come before, and will be true for whatever comes after. Time does not assign importance based on sequence. It allows participation briefly, and then moves on. What remains, after all speculation, is not an answer, but a posture. A way of standing within uncertainty without resisting it. To imagine earlier civilizations is not to diminish humanity, but to place it gently back into context. We are not isolated. We are not exceptional in our impermanence. We are aligned with it. Listener, consider how much effort humans invest in permanence. Monuments, records, archives, signals sent into space. These efforts are meaningful not because they will last forever, but because they express awareness. They reflect the moment when intelligence recognizes its own fragility and responds not with panic but with curiosity. Even if nothing we build survives deep time intact, the act of building still matters. It shapes experience, it alters relationships, it creates meaning within the moment of existence. The universe does not ask more than that. The idea of being a reset loses its sharpness here. Whether we are first, second, or one among many becomes secondary to how we inhabit our moment. The planet does not judge its occupants by novelty. It responds only to interaction. How we move through this window of time is the only influence we truly have. There is a quiet dignity in accepting this. It removes the pressure to be final, definitive, or complete. It allows life to be lived as process rather than product. Awareness becomes participation rather than control. When future beings look back, if they ever do, they will not see intentions. They will see patterns, shifts in climate, layers of chemistry, changes in biodiversity, perhaps faint traces of altered sediment or unusual concentrations of elements. From these fragments they will construct stories just as we do now, incomplete and provisional. They may wonder who we were. They may misunderstand us entirely, and that too would be natural. Understanding across deep time is always partial. Meaning is local. Context erodes. This does not make our experience empty, it makes it intimate. Meaning exists at the scale of experience, not at the scale of eternity. What is felt now is real now. That is enough. Observer, notice how the question that began this journey has softened. It no longer demands resolution. It has become background like the hum of distant systems continuing beyond awareness. This is often where the most honest understanding settles not as clarity, but as peace with ambiguity. Science itself ends here not in answers, but in margins, in statements carefully bounded by uncertainty, in acknowledgement of limits. This is not weakness, it is maturity. It reflects alignment with reality rather than domination over it. The universe does not reveal itself all at once, it offers glimpses, signals, patterns that hint without confirming. To live with these hints without forcing them into certainty is a form of wisdom. As the final moments stretch gently outward, the idea of cycles becomes less abstract. Breath itself is a cycle. Attention rises and falls. Sleep and waking alternate. Life mirrors the structure of the universe at every scale. This repetition is not monotony. It is stability. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, not watching, not waiting, simply continuing. It does not carry memory. It carries motion. And motion is enough to sustain existence. This realization does not shrink the self. It places it where it belongs. Embedded. Temporary. Meaningful within its limits. The need to be exceptional dissolves, replaced by the relief of belonging to something that does not require explanation. As this final thought settles, language becomes unnecessary. The body already understands what the mind has been circling. There is nothing to resolve tonight, nothing to protect, nothing to conclude. Silence is the universe thinking, and silence is where you are now. It's all right to not understand. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller. Not an ending, but a quiet place where the path fades gently into shadow. We've moved through deep time and fragile traces, through questions buried beneath stone and silence, through the possibility that our world is not a beginning, but a return shaped by forces far older than memory. Out here, the universe does not rush to explain itself. The past remains unfinished, the future unwritten. What we glimpse are patterns, echoes, and pauses where meaning settles without demanding certainty. Civilizations may rise and vanish, continents may drift. Yet the quiet motion continues steady and indifferent, carrying stories we will never fully read. There is no fear in this smallness, only perspective. To exist briefly within such vast cycles is not to be insignificant, but to be part of something enduring. Gravity holds us. Time carries us. Silence surrounds us with more questions than answers, and that too is enough. Science teaches us how matter moves and memory fades. Reflection teaches us how wonder remains. Somewhere between entropy and awareness, between dust and thought, meaning appears for a moment, and then drifts on. Some truths don't demand solutions, only presence. So rest here a while. Let the questions soften. Let the stars continue their slow work overhead. The universe will keep watch as it always has. Sleep well, traveller.